Hello, everyone. Welcome to Bible Talk with Felicia. Today, we will be going over Genesis chapter 16, which is about Hagar and Ishmael. One of my favorite chapters. And the reason why is because it teaches us that we need to wait on the Lord and not take matters into our own hands. And also, this chapter teaches us not to run from our problems and to face our problems. So let's get into it. Chapter 16, Genesis chapter 16. I'm going to start with verses 1 through 3. Okay, in this verse, in verse 1 through 3, it tells us that Sarai was barren. God had shut up her womb. Sarah told her husband Abram, the Lord has prevented her from having children. So she told him to sleep with her handmaid. Now, what kind of foolishness is that? But to sleep with her handmaid, Hagar, and perhaps she shall obtain children by her. Now, Abram, of course, listened to her. You know, he listened to his wife Sarai, I would say Adam listened to Eve in the garden. Now, in verse 3, it tells us that Hagar is an Egyptian. Remember, her custom and her religious practice is different from Abram and Sarai. Now, at the end of verse 3, the Amplified version says this: after Abram lived in the land of Canaan 10 years, Abram's wife Sarai took Hagar, the Egyptian maid, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his secondary wife. Now let's pause right here just for a minute. What kind of mess is this? Now let me explain something here, because when I first read this, I said, this is really not making no kind of what sense. It's just not making no sense. Because why would you sit up there? Now, remember, all the other chapters that we went through, God kept promising Abram and Sarai that he was going to give Abram a son through Sarai. Now, why would you sit up there and give your husband to another woman? So as I did my research, and this is what I found out. During that time, a married woman who could not have children was shamed by her peers and was often required to give a female servant to her husband in order to produce an heir. The children born to the servant woman were considered the children of the wife. Now, so it started to make sense then, after I did the research, and, pretty much Hagar was the surrogate. Okay. But what I would say is this, Abraham should have trusted in the Lord. His actions showed a lack of faith that God would fulfill his promise. Like, come on, Abram, like God been talking to you, in chapters 13 through 15 about promises. I would even include chapter 12. And this is just my personal thought on this, on verses 1 through 3. I think Abram and Sarai allowed time to get the best of them. Because of their age, Abram and Sarai test was waiting on God's timing. And I think that was their test, waiting. And just like so many of us, we have a hard time with waiting. So I would say, ponder on this. It's not always best to take matters into your own hands. Like Sarah did when God told, pretty much when God told Abram the promise, he was going to give him a child. Why would you and Sarai even do that? And the fact that Abram listened to his wife like Adam did Eve, I mean, this is, it's like history repeating itself. So let's go into verse 4. This is in verse 4, it let us know that after Hagar conceived, once she got pregnant, her contempt robbed Sarai of her happiness. See, out of their lack of faith came a series of problems. See, if Abram and Sarai would have waited, they wouldn't have had this problem with Hagar. So because of Hagar's contempt, Sarai, and this is in verse 5, Sarai blamed Abram. Ain't that funny? How you going to blame him? But she blamed Abram. And just like, I would say Adam and Eve, they did the same thing in Genesis after they sinned, blaming each other. So let's go to verse 6. Abram got Sarai together. He really did. He just got her together and told her, "This is your servant." So Sarai treated Hagar so badly, like she just finally just ran away. Like Hagar was like, "You know what? I'm done. Deuces." So in verse 7, God sent an angel who found Hagar by a fountain of water in the wilderness. And in verse 8 and 9, the angel of the Lord the angel of the Lord told Sarai, "I need for you to return and submit to Sarai." Now we're going to get back to verse, we will get back to verse 9 because that's really important there. Return and submit. Okay. In verse 10, God promised to multiply her descendants exceedingly, will be fulfilled with the birth of her child. And then in verse 11 and 12, the angel of the Lord said to her, "She shall have a son named Ishmael, because the Lord had heard thy affliction." The angel of the Lord foretold Ishmael's future pretty much. Let me read verse 12 to you. And let me go to, I want to read the KJV version here. Let me see here, because I like how it pretty much reads. Hold on, let me go to it here. It says, "And he will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren." So, the angel of the Lord is pretty much like giving her a preview in verse 12 of like the way that her son's future is going to be. So in verse 13 through 16, Hagar went back and she had Ishmael. And that's really how Genesis chapter 16 ends. But I want to go back to verse 9 here. Let me look at my Bible here. Verse 9, it says, "The angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit yourself under her hand." Okay. Now, I want to say this, Sarai chose to take matters into her own hands. And she gave her servant to Abram. And really, it didn't make it no better, because Abram, who went along with his wife plan, but when the circumstances, begin to get high, he refused to solve the problem. And Hagar, who ran away from the problem, in spite of her messy situation, God demonstrated his ability to work in all things for good. So, Sarai and Abram still received the son that they wanted, quote unquote, and God solved Hagar's problem. Abram, despite the fact that Abram refused to get involved, but what I will say is this: because of Abram and Sarai's decision, because of their one decision, it caused them a lifetime of trouble and problems. Because you're going to read throughout the Bible about this one decision, because they could not wait upon the Lord, just like Adam and Eve. She going to eat the forbidden fruit, and then she going to give it to her husband, and because of that disobedience, they got kicked out the garden. And each one of them, man, woman, and the daggone serpent, they all got cursed. And if you want to, if there's a lesson that needs to be taught out of Genesis chapter 16, it needs to be about the decision making. Okay, decision making. If God tells you, look, next week I'm gonna give you $1 million, you need to wait until next week. Don't be like Sarai and be like, oh, well, I'm just gonna take matters into my own hands. And that's what she did. And because of that, it caused nothing but problems. Because then we're going to read that finally God, and I think it is chapter 17, where God visit Abram and tell him, no, Sarai going to get pregnant. And when she get pregnant and have her child, it's going to cause conflict up in the house. But if you would have waited, that would never have happened. So we need to really wait on the Lord. Now, back to verse, I know I said we're going to go back to verse 9 about returning and submitting. And then I totally just skipped that. But let me go back to that. One reason why that she needed to return is because she needed to face Sarai. She needed to face her problems and also submit to her. Hagar needed to really work on her attitude towards Sarai. No matter how, how things look, she really needed to work on herself. Us running away from our problems, just like, Hagar did. Some people do. They run away from their problems. You running away is not going to solve it. It is always wise to return back to the problem and face it. And trust me, sometimes God will tell you to return and submit to the very thing that you is truly trying to get away from. And it's not easy. It's not easy. So I will say in this situation, look at it from Hagar's perspective. That was not easy. This woman first going to offer you up to her husband. Probably didn't even ask her to be the surrogate. Your husband going to sleep with me, and I'm going to get pregnant, and now, you mad because I'm giving you attitude? So you can really get a lot out of Genesis chapter 16, but the one thing that I want you to get is, decision making. Be careful of the decisions that you make in life, because you can't wait. And really, that's all that I have. If I left anything out of Genesis chapter 16, please feel free to leave it in the comment box below. Click the thumbs up button, and I'll talk to you later.